Science Education Coordinator and the Okefenokee RESA Science Specialist. So I'll give you the floor. Thanks.
Thank you, Miss Mary Alice. I'm so glad to hear Eamon and Aaron and Heather's presentations because it meshes very well with a lot of the projects that we are trying to get started at Okefenokee Swamp Park. I am very thankful to be here. I hate that we couldn't be here in person, but I'll be perfectly honest with you. It is currently 45 degrees and pouring down rain here. So I don't know how great our nature walk would have been today anyway. So probably a little bit of a blessing that we're virtual rather than in person. But I am like Miss Mary Alice said, the Environmental Science Education Coordinator here at the park. And I also I'm technically hired by Okefenokee RESA, which is the Regional Educational Service Agency. I serve 9 of our surrounding counties, and primarily what I do is I'd say probably about 80% of the time when schools are functioning at least somewhat normally, I do outreach programs in our local schools. So I take animals and plants and things that I find around the park, and of course our animal ambassadors, and I bring them into schools and do grade level appropriate standards-based programs for those students. And then of course I also help with field trips here at the park. But because I am new, move forward for me. No, not that. There we go. A little bit about me. I actually got my undergraduate degree at Warnell at UGA in wildlife studies. And then of course I got my master's at Georgia Southern in middle grades teaching. And that's actually what I did for about 5.5 years. I taught 7th grade life science. And then of course, before that I was in environmental education at Georgia Southern at their wildlife center. And I actually worked for DNR seasonally for about, I think 6 to 8 months, something like that. But environmental education has always been my passion. It's where my heart lies. So when this position with RESA and with Okefenokee Swamp Park came up, I had to apply pretty quick. It's my husband and my little girl, Marley. And of course, we're expecting another in March. So we're pretty excited about that. This little stinker is very excited. She's convinced it's going to be a girl, and we hate to tell her it's probably not going to be. She'll get over it pretty soon, hopefully. So a little bit of background on Okefenokee Swamp Park. Miss Heather mentioned it earlier, but we are in our 75th anniversary this year. We actually just finished up our 75th anniversary celebration. All of October, we had different events planned to celebrate us being 75 years old. And largely during that 75 years, we've been heavily focused on entertainment. There's always been an education piece that's been there, but education wasn't always at the forefront. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. But to be perfectly honest with you, the park has not always been run that way. We are now in a major culture shift, a major management shift. So things are changing. It's just that we have 75 years worth of things to change in a relatively short time. So we are working hard to make some pretty big changes. And if you haven't come to the Swamp Park recently, or if it's been a very long time since you've been, I encourage you to come out. Let me know if you want to visit. I can arrange for you to come and do all the fun things with me. So our new mission is to provide visitor access and interpretive education that inspires conservation advocacy for the Okefenokee Swamp. I won't get too political, but if you've been following, Okefenokee Swamp in general has gotten a lot of news attention lately with the mining projects that have been proposed. So a lot of this sparked from that. We have a brand new, I say brand new, since June or July of last year, we have a new executive director. Her name is Ms. Kim Bednarik. She is absolutely wonderful. She's a champion for conservation and for education, and it's been wonderful working for her. We also have a brand new general manager, Mr. Levi Welling, who came to us from Omni Resort on Amelia Island, and he is also a big advocate for conservation and for education. So a lot of things are moving in the right direction. And we are making sure that we do what we can to make sure that every person that visits Okefenokee Swamp Park walks away with the understanding that, yes, while you were here, you had fun and you were entertained, but you also learned something about the swamp, and you made an emotional connection to something that you experienced at the swamp that makes you want to take care of it a little bit better. So how we accomplish our mission, this little boy was so cute. He was actually in our summer camps, but he wanted to smell every single plant, especially after Miss Heather and Miss Mary Alice and Miss Amy and Gail and Mary Lynn came and learned. They taught all about the plants. They were obsessed with plants afterwards. Like every single plant that we encountered, this kid wanted to sniff because someone had told him that, different plants have different smells. So it just goes to show you that, everything we say to kids can have a really huge impact. And I know this child's mom, and he still apparently talks about everything that he learned all the time. So that's the kind of thing that we are trying to accomplish at Swamp Park, is to leave those lasting impressions with not just kids, but I wrote in here, cradle to gray. We really do serve cradle to gray. I mostly serve the school-age children, but that doesn't mean that all ages can't be affected. So we do provide immersive educational experiences for all guests. And we have boat excursions, train excursions. We always do a nature show. We're looking to actually expand that part, and we'll start offering nature walks and a couple of other special programs in 2022. Right now, I'm currently the only educator that's on property. We do have naturalists that are on property, and those are your boat guides and your train guides, your nature show people. But I'm the only person that's actually certified in any kind of education. We are hiring someone. He'll actually start week after Thanksgiving, and then he'll be fully ready to go in January. So we'll have a whole lot more offerings starting in January 2022 that I'm really excited about. We also do field trips. And we have a lot of different options that are available for field trips for different schools, homeschool groups, even just tours. We get a lot of Boy Scout and Girl Scout groups that come in. We get groups from senior citizen centers, from churches, even just large family groups that meet here for family reunions. We also do my outreach programs. That's where I go and visit schools. And then, of course, Camp Oscar, which is our summer camp. I do a junior naturalist program that's for kids that are 9 to 13-year-olds. It's second Saturday of every month, and we have a different theme every month. So we talk about, like our last one was amazing adaptation. So we took them around and showed them different animals, different plants, how they live here, why they live here, and not necessarily somewhere else. Showing them really why this habitat, this ecosystem is so incredibly important to a lot of different species. And then, of course, our I Wonder homeschool program is currently once a month. That program will be expanding tremendously in 2022. And there's just a few pictures. Okefenokee Swamp Park is situated on the very northern edge of the swamp. So we are in more of the upland type areas. So our water and hydrology is a little bit different, or the habitat in general is a little bit different from the rest of the swamp. If you visited Stephen C. Foster State Park, or if you've visited the National Wildlife Refuge, the habitat that you'll experience here is quite different. We are on that northern edge where literally less than a mile up the road, you run into sandhill forests rather than really wet habitats. So plants of the Okefenokee, depending on who you ask and what research or what literature you look at, we have 600, we have 631, there's 650. The number that I usually use is 631 different species of plants. A lot of those are unique, meaning you don't really find them too many other places. We also have a pretty large number of carnivorous plant species, which I'll get into in just a few minutes. But these four are some of my favorites. Of course, the white water lily, the bald cypress, the blue flag iris are absolutely beautiful when they're in bloom in the spring. And then, of course, our golden trumpet, or the yellow pitcher plant. That one particular plant you normally cannot access And it is the only one that I know of that is actually on park property. And you have to take a kayak or a canoe all the way out Green River, which is not normally open to the public. But it is a beautiful specimen. It's quite large. So we are not without our obstacles and past management practices. And I don't want to spend too much time on the negative, because I'll be perfectly honest, there are a lot of past management practices that have been pretty bad here at Okefenokee Swamp Park, and we're working to change a lot of those. First one is mowing and weed eating. I think it was Aaron that mentioned, weed eating all the way down to the edge of the pond. This picture is a perfectly good example of what not to do. And this is unfortunately still taking place in a lot of areas around Okefenokee Swamp Park. We're working on developing a comprehensive conservation management plan. So Eamon and Aaron, don't be surprised if you hear from me in the next month or so to get your input on some things. So mowing and weeding, we have several large areas of the park that there's really no reason the native plants shouldn't be taking over, but because they're mowed, it's largely been managed more, like I said earlier, for entertainment, and that being the idea of these big flat open landscapes where people can walk through them and not feel like they're going to step on things, or one of the justifications for mowing all the way down to the water for some of the wet areas was so that people can better see the alligators. And the alligators don't care, they'll just lay on top of it. But we're working on that one. And then of course, you can see in this photo, there's a big piece of heavy equipment. And this actually happened one morning. I came in, I was like, what is going on? They were removing a lot of the native vegetation that was in some of our canals. And when I say remove, I do mean completely remove. So all of the vegetation that you see that's currently on the left side of that boardwalk is now gone. Some of it has grown back. And actually, this little guy is what stopped it. I say little, he is actually about 56 pounds. This is a Sewanee alligator snapping turtle that, not this particular piece of equipment, but another one of those giant rakes. And I do mean giant, like as long as my desk is. Giant rake scooped him up as it was scooping up some of the water lily roots. And they, of course, I was not there that morning. One of the naturalists sent a picture of it, and I said, wait, stop right now. Because I'd seen the research about the Sewanee alligator snapping turtles and how they're up for listing, and how they've been split from regular alligator snapping turtles. And I said, we really need to get this guy checked out, because if he's what I think he is, this will be the first sighting of one of these specific turtles this far north in the Okefenokee ever. And so of course we brought in Ben, who's a biologist with the Orion Society. He came and checked him out, took DNA samples, and of course it was confirmed that he was a Sewanee alligator snapping turtle. But in the meantime, I was on the phone with our executive director, and I said, we really need to stop, like right now, stop getting the vegetation out. And of course, luckily, they did not get as much done as they had originally planned. Planting of non-natives and invasives is a pretty big one. These are just two. And these, I'm pretty sure, actually came in all on their own. I don't think they were actually planted. This is the winged yam on the left, and then on the right is the sweet autumn clematis. I was walking actually past my office one day, and I was like, what is that really pretty white flower? And then I get closer to it, I'm like, oh no, not another one. So we do currently have, I think at last count, I was up to about 25 invasive species that are on property. Some of those have just come in naturally, whether it's through, the wildlife or the birds, or even just the seeds that float. But we do have quite the list of invasive species that are gone. So I actually appreciated hearing Eamon's presentation on how to get rid of some of these. But the winged yam, at first I thought it was air potato, and I got really concerned because it's right over. We have an authentic-ish Pioneer Island that mimics what swampers would have looked like when the swamp was occupied by people. And so, you know, air potato is actually poisonous. I was like, oh no, if those fall in and the hogs eat them, we could be in trouble. But it is winged yam, but it is starting to completely take over in a lot of areas. We also have a super large area of bamboo, and this is actually not all of it. So about 30 or 40 years ago, from what I understand, from the best records I can find, we had a horticulturalist that worked out of our really lovely greenhouse that we're going to start doing some work on hopefully pretty soon. And he just grew all kinds of things in there and didn't necessarily know or really cared what he planted around the park, is from what I understand. So he planted several clumps of bamboo that started out to be a blind or a border along some of our sidewalks. And of course, you can see now this kind of circular octagonal round building, that's our gift shop. So that's our main entrance. And all behind that, to the left of that is our alligator pen. And then all behind that is the bamboo. And then of course, right next to our nature center, which is this little half circle building, there is a lot of bamboo, and there's probably about 1/4 of an acre more of it that's actually on the federal side of the property. So Okefenokee Swamp Park does, we have a 50-year lease with Dixon Memorial State Forest. So we are actually on state property, but part of our property actually, it cuts right through the center of our nature center is actually on U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service property. So we do have some bamboo on that federal side as well. And this is something that we know is going to take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and probably a lot of money to actually get rid of. We're working on several grants right now that will help with that, just because it is going to take some pretty large effort. And I've also reached out to several state people with the state that will hopefully be able to help and give us some ideas on the best way to manage and to do that, because we know that, you know, as soon as we get that bamboo out, we want to be able to replace it with some local ecotypes. So that's not necessarily going to be a quick project, because we'll have to have our plants ready to replace everything, ready to go pretty fast after all of this is removed. And then the last one is fire suppression. The the Fish and Wildlife Service does a really great job of doing prescribed burns on their side of things, but because of where we're located and where our buildings are, we've had some issues in the past with fire and concern with human safety and with building safety, or the safety of our structures on property. So it's kind of difficult to see in this picture. But if you see on the left, the two darker trails, that's actually our boat trail that kind of goes in like a little circle. And then there's a boardwalk trail. It's very light, you can see. But if you notice, the vegetation that surrounds the buildings and the parking lot is a lot more dense. It's a lot thicker. That is our area where fire has been suppressed. So in the big 2007 turnaround fire, up until pretty much where the train tracks are, almost, kind of almost directly in the middle of the photo, everything was allowed to burn. I say allowed. The fire spread all through that. But then in the area surrounding the buildings, the forest is a lot more dense. The Georgia Forestry Commission was supposed to actually come out this spring and burn the area that's up in the middle center. Let's see. Oh, never mind. But because they were so backlogged from COVID, they did not actually get a chance to come out and burn this year. So we are working very closely with representatives from Dixon Memorial State Forest and with Georgia Forestry Commission, who are going to come out in the next year when it's burn season for us again, to actually come out and hopefully burn little pieces at a time. Because right now we're in that process, or in that stage where the fuel on the ground has built up so much that if we do have another, what we call 100-year fire, another prairie making fire in the swamp that is close to us, we're in a pretty dangerous situation right now, because it has not been burned in so long. So I'm not going to talk I can't give you too many details on this particular obstacle because it's top secret. But there is a specific plant, or actually a couple specific plants that are, or 3 or 4 actually, that are rare and or threatened, that are very near Okefenokee Swamp Park, and I cannot give you the exact location. But just know that this is a pre-picture and this is a post picture. So you can see beautiful, right? Barbara's buttons, bluegrass, got some other native plants that have popped up, and it was absolutely gorgeous. I didn't actually include any of the specific plants that are in this area because I cannot give it away. But another agency came in, and this area is protected. So there are restrictions in place about mowing and what can be done. And as you can see, those were not followed. So unfortunately, that's an obstacle that we're overcoming right now. I did have a project slated to use seeds from a particular plant from this area that were going to be part of our propagation project, and now those seeds are gone. So it's rather unfortunate because this mowing, so I took this picture, the pre-picture on, I think, a Wednesday, and the next Monday I drove in to work to find this. So it's pretty disappointing because it sets us back for, a year or two, but I keep telling myself plants grow back. Hopefully they're not damaged beyond reason. This is another result of that mowing. When the mowing took place, that was, we'd actually just gotten like almost a week solid, or a solid week of rain. So it was very, very wet when they decided to mow. So you've got these huge tracts in this area of habitat that really destroyed a lot of plants. And as you can see, you've got all the little sundews that are here that luckily some of them made it, but I'm sure that where that big tire track went, that a lot of them did not. This is another interesting obstacle. And we've actually had some folks make their way into the park to actually find and dig this because we do have it within the park. This is yellow colic root, and locally people call it stargrass. And apparently, and I had to look this up because I'd never heard of it, and a lot of people still haven't heard of it. But we have folks along a particular area near the park that will come in, and you'll see them on the side of the road, and we're like, what are they doing? So I went in and asked some employees that had been with the park for a while, and they said, oh, they're digging up that stargrass. I said, they're doing what? They're digging up the stargrass. And so I was like, I've got to research this because I don't know what they're talking about. But apparently the root of this particular plant can be used for medicinal purposes. And you can find it online for about $18 a pound. So if you can imagine how many of these single plants it takes to get a whole pound, they dig up a lot. So they'll dig up the plants, they'll take the root off, they'll bag the root up, and then just drop the rest of the plant back on the ground. So unfortunately, I have found a lot of these clumps in some of our habitats around. I have reported it to DNR on a couple of, to our DNR law enforcement on a couple of different occasions. So hopefully they'll patrol during the season a lot more now, and we'll be able to squash that. So goals and future outlooks. We are going to reintroduce fire to a lot of different locations around the swamp park. That picture that's on the left is actually of our low boardwalk. That was a regular boardwalk and it completely burned down in 2007. We're working on a pretty massive grant right now that will actually completely replace that boardwalk. And as they do that, they'll actually reintroduce some fire to that area as well if it is deemed necessary. We are going to start working in the next month or so with hopefully some biologists, cough, Eamon and Aaron, about a comprehensive conservation management plan, very similar to what the National Wildlife Refuge has, so that we can have plans in place for how do we mow? When we have to use herbicides, how do we go about that? Who does it? Do we have someone that's certified? So different things, and how do we combat invasives? What do we do when we find an area that needs to be it's an R word, I lost it. Anyway, replanting, yes, replanting of local ecotypes. How do we do all of that so that we actually have something in writing that, you know, we can even share with the public? This is what our goal, what our mission is. This is what we're looking forward to. Here's how we're also going to use it to educate the public about why we're doing all of these different things. So in particular, for me, it's not just with a wildlife background, it's not just doing it for the management of the ecosystem itself. It's also, I also see it as a huge educational opportunity. You know, we have visitors from literally all over the world come in and they see us doing these different projects. We want to be able to explain in an effective and meaningful way why we are taking these management steps. This is one particular project that should be funded pretty soon. We have someone, a local magazine that's actually going to sponsor this little area. This is our gopher tortoise and box turtle enclosure. And actually, if you look at the boulder on the far right, the really big one, there's a little gopher tortoise popping his head out of there. That's where his little burrow is. So our sponsor wants to help us completely redo this enclosure and put in some native plants that the gopher tortoises and the box turtles actually would like to eat and hide in. So I'm pretty excited about having a chance to design that. You know, we'll get some of these bigger rocks and things like that out. We will have to raise this up a little bit. Right now, it gets pretty wet. Like today, you can imagine it's very, very wet in there, but with all of the rain. But we have a lot of work to do in it. But I'm pretty excited about that. So we'll be reaching out to get some plants from some of you folks pretty soon. And these are some of my favorites. If you came to help with, I think it was the second or the third summer camp, you might remember us planting these musky mints that are on the edges of one of our canals. They have taken off tremendously and are doing so well. I'm actually going to start collecting seeds here from them pretty soon if I haven't missed my window. But I'm very excited to see those doing so well. And we actually took part in the Georgia pollinator census, and that was one of the best pollinator plants that I was able to find. Lots of native honeybees and butterflies and all kinds of things going to that musky mint. And of course, the Barbas buttons, those are so incredibly gorgeous. I love those. We do have an area on property where we have some hooded pitcher plants. Those are actually along one of our, actually the man-made pond that we have that our train goes past. We'll look, actually, those need to be managed here pretty soon. I think they need a good burn. And then of course our little butterworts that are all along our roadsides. Probably one of my favorite carnivorous plants is the bladderwort. I think we have 8 different species of bladderwort that are within the swamp. How many we actually have in Swamp Park, I don't know, because they're incredibly difficult to identify. But I know this one because of the little purple flowers that popped up. But this is, the flowers are actually along the low boardwalk out to Skull Lake. So you can really only access it right now by our boat tour. So I took this picture earlier this summer when it was in full bloom. One of the kids' favorite is Carolina redroot, which is, you know, really common in this area, but they love to squish the seed pods and let their fingers turn orange and then go wash their hands and their fingers are still orange. So it just makes a little bit of a meaningful impact, and they don't forget that one. Another one that they don't forget, of course, is the wax myrtle. And both of these I like to talk about with kids because they have or had other purposes. You know, the swampers and our indigenous cultures would actually use both of these plants for various purposes. So it's just a fun thing to talk about with them. This is one of my personal favorites, climbing fetterbush or climbing heath, which only grows on about, I think it's 4 or 5 different species. It is a vine that crawls along or grows along the inside of bark. We have a couple different specimens that are growing on pine trees, but a majority of ours are actually growing on pond cypress. And these little guys, climbing fetterbush is the only known host plant for the Okefenokee zale, which is an endemic caterpillar moth that we have in the Okefenokee swamp. So kids really like it when they come in March and April, and they're actually able to find that caterpillar on our climbing heath, which we have all along our boardwalks on our cypress trees. So here's my big appeal. We do need help. As you can tell, we have a lot of big projects that will be going on in the next, I'd like to say year, but honestly, it's more like a 5 to 10 year plan. But quick ways that you can help are with our Camp Oscar, which I was so incredibly thankful for Coastal Plain chapter for coming out and helping during summer camp this summer. Some of my kids that came to summer camp that still come to our junior naturals like to go and check on their plant that they planted. So you really did have an impact with those kids, and I truly appreciate that. We were going to have an invasive removal day this October, but with all of our big anniversary events, that has now been pushed to honestly probably next fall. So no, spring isn't necessarily the best time to do that with some of the invasives that we do have. And of course, after that, replanting of native species. I've got to go and visit Miss Amy's house and see all of her plant propagation projects. So we do have plans to work on that. And I've actually started a mini project in my office for now, which I'll be perfectly honest, I think I may have a black thumb because it's not doing so well. So I might need some more advice on that. I tried doing cuttings from some of our native trees and shrubs, and they're not doing so hot. But we will start planting seeds and stuff as soon as I can collect some this fall. So there's lots of ways that you can help out. This little canoe is one of the garden beds that we repurposed and planted with all natives. And I'd like to report that those are doing exceptionally well. So we've got some big things going. Does anybody have any questions for me?
I don't see any questions yet in the chat.